Hello, hello. We're still here for some strange reason, so we'll do another study. This is somewhat of a rant, but it's still a study. I'd say more study than rant, but what are you going to do? We're going to talk about some crazy claims. Good to see everybody. And we address these things because they're crazy and because some people fall for them. So somebody has to look at it. It might as well be us, right? So let's get right into this. I'm going to show some verses on screen, and then we'll talk about why I'm showing them on screen and what the crazy teaching is. And there's going to be more than one. So the first one, let's read Psalm 5, 4, and 5. For you are not a God who is pleased with wickedness. With you, evil people are not welcome. The arrogant cannot stand in your presence. You hate all who do wrong. And then Psalm 11:5, and this isn't all of them, but you get the idea. The Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked, those who love violence, he hates with a passion. Okay? So now let's look at some New Testament verses, which I had up here, but for some reason they went off the screen when I wasn't looking. So let me blow this up and get it to where you can see it. And I think I make that a little bit bigger. John 3:16. Remember the ones we just read, right? So we're going to look at John 3:16 now. Likewise, since God loved the world, he also gave his unique son so that everyone who would trust in him would not be destroyed, but would have eternal life. So God loved the world. You can see the question we're getting at. Anyway, so Romans 5:8. God displays his love for us by virtue of the fact that the Anointed One died for our sakes while we were still sinners. He died for us. And then 1 Corinthians 13:1, the first paragraph of the chapter defining love in the Bible. If I were to speak in the languages of people and angels, yet had no love, I would be like noisy metal or clanging cymbal. And if I were to be prophetic and perceive all secrets, and have all knowledge, and have a faith that can move mountains, yet have no love, I am nothing. And if I were to give away all my possessions, and even give up my body so I could brag, which is to say self-sacrifice or martyrdom, yet have no love, I gain nothing. And then, of course, the famous shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:35, Jesus wept. It was at the funeral of Lazarus. And in Matthew 23:37, after the triumphal entry, Jesus laments, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How many times have I wanted to gather your children as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you wouldn't have it. And in Matthew 5:43, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and despise your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you will be children of your Father in the heavens. For as the sun rises on good and bad people alike, rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you only love those who love you, do you expect to be rewarded? Even tax contractors do that. And if you only welcome your sisters and brothers, what great thing have you done? Even the other nations do that. But if you do these things, you will be complete, just as my heavenly Father is complete. So let me greet some more people in chat that I didn't have time to type a greeting to. That would be Professor Red, MAA, and Rachel Menifee. I think are the ones I didn't type a greeting to. But what do you think that all has to do with, the first two about God hating sinners and then all of these? Recently, I was arguing with someone who turned out to be a teenager, a couple of them actually, who made one of the craziest claims I think I've ever seen, which is really saying something. That God only acts or pretends like he loves sinners, but he really hates them. I kid you not, that's what they said. Based upon Psalm 5, 4, and 5, and 11:5. You hate all who do wrong, and he hates sinners with a passion. Okay? But what about those other verses? They didn't want to hear about those other verses. But on top of that, love was defined by them as simply mental agreement. Never mind 1 Corinthians 13 and all that, and God so loved the world, and this is not mental agreement because he died for us while we were still sinners. But that's how they defined it. Never mind, all those other verses that Jesus died when we were still sinners, that actions without love are empty and worthless, 1 Corinthians 13, that Jesus lamented over Jerusalem, wept when Lazarus died, and that we're to be like God who loves his enemies. Never mind all of that. Those two statements from the Psalms of poetic hyperbole override them all to these people. And of course, God is angry with sinners, but anger can't be equated with hatred. So, yeah, you have to read the original Paleo, which few of them actually do, and besides, there's not as much to go on. There aren't that many original Paleo Hebrew documents to work with. We just know that it was earlier. We don't have a lot of it, as far as I know. Anyway, but the thing is, even in the Old Testament, God doesn't hate sinners, and we're going to look at a little technical detail on that. This paragraph here, I don't think I can blow it up anymore. It goes off the screen, because not everyone has a responsive website. Shame on them. But anyway, this main paragraph here says, how then can anyone reconcile the verses that seem to suggest that God hates sinners but loves them at the same time? One of the most plausible solutions is that the Bible writers are using a figure of speech called metonymy, where they write that God hates sinners. Metonymy or nomy is defined as a figure by which one name or noun is used instead of another to which it stands in a certain relation. And metonymy can be of cause, when the person acting can be put in place of the thing that is done. For instance, in Luke 16:29, the text says, "They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them." In reality, they did not have Moses or the prophets, those actual people, but they had their writings. The name Moses is a metonymy that stood for his writings. Get the idea of what a metonymy is now? It's a figure of speech. And it stood for his writings since he was the cause of the writings. In modern times, that would be like saying, I hate Shakespeare. Would the person who said that mean that he had hated Shakespeare's personality? No, we understand he would be saying that he does not like the writings of Shakespeare, with no comment on the playwright's personality. So now we know what a metonymy is. Okay? And the case is being made that this is what's going on when in the Psalms we read that God hates sinners. So we can't say that point blank, because we have this figure of speech that has been used for thousands of years, and of course includes in the Bible. So I think, let's see, got ahead of my notes here or something. That's, I think I'm missing one of them actually. I missed a link. Hold on, let me get the missing link. The missing link. This one for some reason didn't get into my list of things here. But it goes with the one we just read, which, let me get you the link for that one and put it somewhere in the chat. So this is the first article I looked at. Now we'll look at hermeneutics at Stack Exchange. Usually, you have to read all the responses to see if the person knows what they're talking about. And everybody pray for Townley's internet connection. Anyway, does God really hate some people? And we read one of the passages, even though he loves the whole world. This is supposedly a contradiction that the critics will bring up. And we read these things already. And one of the answers is, the Lord tests the righteousness, I think they mean righteous, for sin, which he, the Lord, hates. The Lord hates the sin. The wickedness of the unrighteous. There's some really bad typos here. Please check the image in low to enlarge. It says, this is a quote from this rabbi, Rashi, that I have mentioned in the debate some months ago on the nature of the biblical Messiah. The Lord tries or tests the righteous, and if because I suffer I am pursued by you, you boast, saying God has forsaken him. It is not so, but so is the custom of the Holy One, to chasten and test the righteous, but not the wicked. This flax works as long as he, it's kind of hard to read, knows that it's of high quality, he beats it. But if it's not high quality, he crushes it only a little because it breaks. So he's saying this is God's discipline of the righteous and not the unrighteous, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me from what, is kind of confusing. But the point on this article that I thought was interesting, that's this breakdown grammatically, which I couldn't tell you is good or bad because I don't know Hebrew grammar. So They're saying, and I'm not going to bother blowing that up, but it says the division of phrases is how Jewish scholars as early as the 10th century had understood the text. Well, that's way too late for the Old Testament, but I'm just saying this is one of their viewpoints. Based on their oral traditions, each phrase cascades back into the previous phrases based on a division of cantillation, which, how they break the thing. The following graph depicts the same graph, translated into English. The Psalms would be an example of antithetic parallelism. So in addition to metonymy in Greek, that's a Greek word, we have antithetic parallelism. I'm sorry, let me get you the Stack Exchange link. And thanks for that link to the debate, Chow. That's the Stack Exchange link. Antithetic parallelism. Consistent with comments from Rashi already noted, the arrangement of cantillation in this verse would suggest that the righteous are tested as over against the wicked who love violence that the Lord hates. So it's a really roundabout way, grammatical, technical way of saying that God doesn't bother with testing the wicked because they're already wicked. It's convoluted, I know. Sorry about that. But anyway, they give an example. When King David received his direct covenant promises for permanent occupation of the throne of Israel, he committed adultery and then murder. Righteous King David committed the very wickedness and violence which the Lord hated, but for which David later repented. And God, in another spot in the Old Testament, says David was a man after his own heart. So, obviously God doesn't hate sinners. He doesn't hate people. He hates wicked things that they do. In summary, the idea here is not that the Lord hates the wicked who love violence. Instead, the arrangement of cantillation suggests that the Lord tests the righteous who may commit wickedness and violence, which the Lord hates. Thus, it is not the sinner who is wicked and who commits violence whom the Lord hates, but those who are not righteous. Which, wicked or not righteous, I'm just reading what they've got here, but just to go along with the other thing. That is, and they're trying to explain it here, the righteous are sinners who may still commit wickedness and violence, but the wicked who love violence are not righteous. Nuance, to say the least, understatement. This nuance of contrast is the verse's antithetic parallel. You're as good a guess as mine as to what they're, you'd have to read that like 5 times. But the point is, there is a grammatical basis for saying that these statements in the Psalms, this poetic hyperbole, is not to be taken as that God actually hates the people. Okay? And for some reason, I don't know why okay, never mind. I was confused by some of the windows I got open here. So I'm going to close this one just to get rid of some windows. And before I go on to this one, I'm going to say that all this is apparently too soft for the teenagers who, like many of this generation, have abandoned all civility and compassion and logic and reason and suffer from what is commonly called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is basically a very overinflated view of oneself. They think they know it all. I mean, they don't even have much life experience, let alone Bible study. And I'm fairly certain they're really not Christians at all. They're wolves in sheep's clothing. But anyway, they think they know it all, and that anybody older than them is a senile old fool, and they'll tell it to your face. And once you identify somebody that's that bad off, I think the best thing is just walk away and pray for their soul, because first you got to get them to the level where they are open to the fact that they might be wrong. Otherwise, it's, as Jesus put the expression, pearls to swine. Now on to this, which is other crazy claims. I don't know about you, but I think that one that God only pretends or appears to love everyone, but really hates most people, is actually Calvinistic, even though the teenagers denied being Calvinists. But it's what I hate about Calvinism. I mean, I don't hate Calvinists. I hate their teaching. And so, I might refer to some Calvinist teacher as I hate that guy. I'm really saying I hate what he teaches. I don't hate him personally. That idea. But now we got some other claims that they call here destructive criticism, which is, of course, the opposite of constructive criticism. And this says that a Dr. Richard E. Friedman, professor of Hebrew and comparative literature at the University of California, has attracted considerable publicity. So the guy has creds, but his publicity is because in recent years his radical claim that Baruch, which was Jeremiah's scribe, authored much of the Old Testament. So here's this guy with academic credentials saying that Moses didn't write, and David didn't write, and Solomon didn't write. It was this guy Baruch, Jeremiah's scribe. He has a book called Who Wrote the Bible? It argues on the basis of language analysis, structure, and the style of the book of Jeremiah, all subjective criteria, and this is a guy with a PhD, that there are remarkable similarities between this document and several other Old Testament books. On the face of it, I hope we can all see that style of writing is something that can change in the middle of a sentence, you know? So Friedman has concluded that not only was Baruch the author of Jeremiah's prophecies, but also major portions of other Old Testament books, such as Deuteronomy, Joshua, Kings, Chronicles. Moreover, the professor opines that no serious scholar today accepts Moses as the author of the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So he's making this great sweeping claim: no serious scholar today accepts Moses as the author of the Pentateuch. And you will have people today making this equally crazy claim because Christians don't put up a hand in defense. He goes on to say he suggests these documents were probably compiled in Babylonia during the 5th century by weaving together the work of 2 or 3 other authors. His approach to the Old Testament is typical of the liberal twist of mind that has seized many religious leaders in the so-called scholastic community. It's fraught with ignorance, eclipsed only by arrogance, and is diseased with dishonesty. I think you can say that statement about a whole lot of things right now, but it's particularly damaging when it comes from people trying to twist the Bible. Now, the expression higher criticism has to do with the study of sources, times, and authorship of ancient literary documents. Many of the biblical higher critics have been grossly influenced by German rationalism. Accordingly, they have been destructive in their approach to the study of the Bible. Their investigations have proceeded along the lines buttressed with biased presuppositions, not cold, unbiased academia, that are grossly inaccurate and which have been repeatedly and thoroughly discredited by reputable scholars. The ones that are actually reputable, not the claim by this other guy. So, the basis on which these destructive critical theories rest: higher critics deny the miraculous. This is one thing. I mean, if you deny the miraculous, you're not a Christian and you really don't have anything to say about Bible interpretation. But they'll say, that, we'll just read here, there's a denial of the miraculous elements of Scripture which result from naturalistic assumptions. That is a bias of its own. The Bible is viewed as merely a collection of myths and legends. The accounts regarding the creation, the fall of man, the flood, etc., are, with a proverbial wave of the hand, dismissed from the realm of factual history. Because they have already decided beforehand that miracles are impossible, they approach the Bible in a strictly naturalistic, which is to say very limited and biased manner. We are patronizingly told that these charming stories contain lessons for us but are not to be understood as literal history. One writer, for example, has explained the Genesis record of creation as something that never was but always is. Such is the typical nature of modernistic mumbo-jumbo. That is an absolute nonsense statement. Okay, let's try not to curse in the chat. I'll let that one go. A classical example of this sort of perspective is found in the Broadman Bible Commentary. Therein, Adam, the first man, is treated as a mere symbol of mankind rather than as a historical person. Joseph Callaway of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is supposed to be legit, depending on who you ask, but writes, they get a lot wrong too. But then he says, if we rob Adam of his symbolic meaning and simply literalize him, what? Then we reduce him to one historical individual for the anthropologist to study. Well, yeah, that's what he is, one historical individual. It isn't simply literalize. Why? You can see the bias in that from the start. Professor Callaway goes on to suggest that if this is our view of Adam, in reality we have lost man. Does that make any sense? No. It's just anti-literalism. Consistent with the foregoing suppositions, therefore, is the notion that there can be no such thing as predictive prophecy, since this would involve a miracle. No Old Testament character could have foretold the details of particular events many years before their actual occurrence. So this is a presumption from a liberal bias. Characteristics of this mode of thought was a statement of Professor Davidson: the prophet is always a man of his own time, and nothing more, and it's always to the people of his own time that he speaks, not to a generation long after, nor to us. Noted scholar Alexander of Princeton was quite correct when he observed that about the only matter upon which the critics really agree is that there simply cannot be distinct prophetic foresight of the distant future. So they have agreed ahead of time with each other, and this is why peer review, whether scientific or literary, is just an echo chamber. I mean, it just makes it obvious. They go on and consider this example: since the book of Daniel contains clear statements as to the fate of certain empires, Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greek, and then Rome, they didn't mention that, it is alleged that the narrative could not have been penned by Daniel. And I would remind you again of a book called Daniel and the Critics' Den, for this very reason. Rather, the document supposedly was authored by some unknown scribe of the interbiblical era, around 167 BC. Porphyry, a pagan philosopher, of the late 3rd century AD, so after the Bible was completed by 200 years, was the first to deny the genuineness of Daniel's prophecies. So it took that long after Daniel's prophecy for somebody to say, no, this isn't legit. He wrote 15 books against Christianity, the 12th of which was intended to depreciate the predictions of the inspired Daniel. But as Jerome, an ancient scholar from 348 to 420 AD, once noted, such oppositions to the prophecies are the strongest testimony of their truth, for they were filled with such exactness that to infidels the prophets seem not to have foretold the future, but to have related things past. In other words, the precision of the prophecy, which Bible critics deny, is what led them to say it wasn't a prophecy, but a later fabrication. A denial of Old Testament prophecy, of course, flies directly in the face of Jesus Christ. Without belaboring the point, we merely mention that the Lord affirmed the Old Testament prophets spoke and wrote about him. The destructive critics would indict Jesus as being a victim of the ignorance of his day, or else nothing more than a dishonest charlatan. So when people say their views of whether the Bible is literal or allegorical, meaning all one and all the other, they're basically saying that painting Jesus as a liar or a fool. And so it matters. And then there is the theory of evolution that influences. The higher critics, in quotes, considerably influenced by Darwinism, assume that the biblical narratives developed along evolutionary lines. Harry Emerson Fosdick, a radical modernist, wrote, "We know that every idea in the Bible started from primitive and childlike origins, and with however many setbacks and delays grew in scope and height toward the culmination of Christ's gospel." In other words, they see evolution under every rock, literally, and they apply this to the Bible. It is argued, for example, that material which appears technical must be assigned a late date, even if great variety of evidence reflects an earlier period of composition. Julius Wellhausen, in the 1800s, early 1900s, prominent leader in the critical movement, contended that the Israel of Moses' day could not have possessed a code containing the complicated civil and social laws that are reflected in the Pentateuch. Accordingly, the law necessarily must have arisen at a later date. This is where evolution is back engineered into everything and leads people astray on so many levels. The discoveries of archaeology, however, have demolished that allegation. A number of law codes have been exhumed from the ancient past, such as the Sumerian systems of Ur-Nammu from 2000 BC, and Lipit Ishtar from 1850 BC, the Akkadian laws of Eshnunna, 1950 BC, and the Code of Hammurabi from 1792 to 50 BC. People think that this is the original. Critics of the Bible will say that this is original, but they don't even know about these earlier ones. I mean, Sumerian long predates the Code of Hammurabi. But the point here is these systems, which were several centuries before Moses, were as technical as the Hebrew Code, though the Mosaic Law is morally superior by far, if you go to read the details. It might be further noted that noted further, sometimes I read it backwards, I don't know why, that liberals of an earlier generation maintained that Moses could never have authored the Pentateuch since the art of writing was unknown in his day. Never mind that the Bible clearly indicates otherwise, the claim was made that writing was invented only at the time of David. Archaeological discoveries, of course, have long since dissolved such misguided charges, so we know that writing goes way, 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 way back. So every time the critics make a claim, a baseless claim based on their assumptions only, which is why it's really baseless, they presume evolution, they presume a steady march from primitive to complex, and even apply it to the Bible. In his fascinating book, History Begins at Sumer, the late Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer, America's foremost Sumerologist, has shown in great detail that civilization, complete with schools, writing, etc., was an established fixture in the Mesopotamian world more than 1,000 years before Moses was born. So ignorance is why people make those claims. Even people with PhDs make these ignorant claims and have great influence. But there are people today who consider themselves enlightened who go around spreading this same nonsense. But here's an important point which highlights a lack of integrity on the part of the critics. Evidence for early writing was known already in the time of Wellhausen, but it was ignored in deference to the sacrosanct theory. In other words, they weren't completely ignorant. There comes a point in history when they still kept making the claims after they knew they were debunked. And people listened to them because they have academic credentials. Reading between the lines. Based upon supposed literary strata or layers or sources, critical theorists, through comparative studies, highly subjective and speculative, have dissected certain biblical books according to alleged authors. The well-known Graf Wellhausen school of thought, for instance, divides the Pentateuch into 4 basic documentary sources called J, E, P, and D. This is very common. You should be familiar with this term. People will bring this up and say that this proves that Moses didn't write the Bible. This is an ignorant claim. So JEPD, when you hear that in this kind of context, you know what they're talking about. These segments supposedly represent Jehovistic, Elohist, priestly, and Deuteronomic origins. That's where they get the JEP and D. This is, that the writer uses Jehovah, this one uses Elohim, and people, again, who think they're enlightened will go around spreading this nonsense. For example, because certain divine names such as Jehovah or Elohim are used in various portions of the Pentateuch, the critics assumed that such patterns must imply a variety of sources. These scholars are totally dominated by the ideology that differences necessitate multiple authors. Such a notion is utterly ridiculous, and it has been demonstrated to be fallacious time and time again. There are known to exist numerous documents of antiquity, admittedly unified literary productions, which employ the use of alternate names as a form of stylistic relief. Kenneth A. Kitchen of the School of Archaeology and Oriental Studies has discussed this matter in considerable detail in his book. He says that major variations in style are universal in ancient text whose literary unity is beyond all doubt. So people, again, this is where people put the Bible on such a higher standard, which isn't bad, but it's a standard they never apply to any of their documents they use to critique it. So people blindly accept, without question, these other ancient texts that use these stylistic changes all the time, and they only think it's a problem when it happens to the Bible. Professor Kitchen further declares that even the most ardent advocate of the documentary theory, which is also how they refer to JEPD, the documentary hypothesis, must admit that we have as yet no single scrap of external, objective, tangible evidence for either the existence or history of J or E or any other alleged source documents. So this documentary hypothesis, JEPD, is a bunch of bunk. Even certain liberals have been forced to admit that the JEPD hypothesis is really without merit. For example, this guy, a late professor, confessed that the main arguments for his theory are without substance. He declared that the system is an edifice founded on air and that it's null and void. So the people who made this up have finally abandoned it, but there are awake people today still spreading around like it's true. Moses Segal, professor at Hebrew University, has written, "We must reject the documentary theory as an explanation of the composition of the Pentateuch. The theory is complicated, artificial, and anomalous. It is based on unproved assumptions. It uses unreliable criteria for the separation of the text into component documents. There is simply no support for the documentary theories of the higher critics, and lots of evidence against them. And in also the realm of crazy ideas, or debunked ideas, we have a legal test of the critical theory. The methodology of the higher critics was highlighted some years ago by an interesting case that went through the Canadian court and British court systems. A lady named Florence Deeks bought a suit in the Ontario courts against H.G. Wells. So she didn't buy a suit, she brought a suit. I might have said bought, I don't know. But anyway, brought a lawsuit against H.G. Wells, the famous writer. And his publisher, the Macmillan Company. Allegedly, Wells had plagiarized a manuscript which Deeks had submitted to these publishers, in which she claimed Wells had borrowed extensively for his book, Outline of History. The defendants denied the charge. Skip some of that. Because they're just saying, hey, there's just a lot of similarities. We didn't borrow from them. Professor Irwin was delighted to oblige Miss Deeks, so he's helping her with a lawsuit, since, as he boasted, this is the sort of task with which my study of ancient literature repeatedly confronts me, and I was interested to test it out in modern works, the methods commonly applied. So he's going to try to defend her by using the methods that he used to debunk the Bible as written by JEPD. The legal test, however, was a devastating blow to the critical procedure. The judge dismissed the case, characterizing the analyses of Professor Irwin as solemn nonsense. The jurist further said Irwin's companions are without significance, and his argument, or comparisons, are without significance, and his argument and conclusions are alike puerile. In a word, the so-called critical method was judged to be just plain silly. So it doesn't work on any document, but especially not the Bible. The case was appealed in Superior Court of Ontario, and finally Privy Council of England, highest council of the British Empire. The judges announced that Dr. Irwin's arguments were almost an insult to common sense, and they decried the utter worthlessness of this kind of evidence. So this kind of evidence, comparing writing styles and the names used for God, is total ignorant nonsense, proved in a court of law, a high court. And then we have higher criticism and a parody. So they're going to use parody to explain why this is such a bad technique. In order to expose the utter folly of so-called critical methods, J.W. McGarvey authored in 1893, remind you, a piece entitled A Literary Analysis of an Ancient Poem. So he's going to apply this to a poem. The hilarious satire throws a floodlight on the absurdity of the critical ideology. So the poem is Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to get her poor dog a bone. When she got there, the cupboard was bare, so the poor dog had none. Doesn't even rhyme right, but, you know. Pursuing the same sort of methodology as that employed by those who dissect the Bible into its alleged literary sources, Professor McGarvey presented the following parody of this nursery rhyme. In the uncritical ages of the past, this poem was believed to be the composition of a single person, a very ancient English woman by the name of Goose. Play along. Whether we should style her Mrs. Goose or Miss Goose, we have no means of deciding with certainty, for the stories which have come down to historical times concerning her are mostly legendary. In other words, they're questioning, we don't know who wrote this poem. It might be supposed that the title Mother would settle this difficult question, but as in certain convents of our day, venerable spinsters are styled Mother, so it may have been in the days of Goose. So this is applying the method that they used to dissect the Bible to the poem about Mother Goose. Or by Mother Goose, which is, of course, not a real name, but that's the author of the Old Mother Hubbard poem. But leaving this interesting question as one for further historical inquiry about who this person was, we don't know the author, because people, I just have to stop to say, people do this all the time. We don't know who wrote the Gospels, nobody believes that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote them, and they'll say that. Which, I don't know, we have a pretty good idea, and also it's not relevant. For the same reason, you don't dismiss the Old Mother Hubbard poem because you don't know who Mother Goose really is. But leaving this interesting question, we turn to the poem itself, and by applying to it the scientific process of literary analysis, we find that the document did not originate, as our fathers have supposed, from a single author, but that it is a composite structure At least 2 original documents have been composed within it by a redactor. This is exactly the JEPD, or documentary hypothesis, claim. This appears from the incongruities between the 2 traditions which evidently underlie the poem. So you can see the path that they're following with their so-called scientific method. One of these traditions represents the heroine of the poem, a venerable Mrs. Hubbard, as a benevolent woman who loved her dog, as appears from the fact that she went to the cupboard to get him some food. If we had the whole story, we should doubtless find that she did this every time the dog was hungry, and as she surely would not go to the cupboard for the dog's food unless she knew there was some in the cupboard, we can easily fill out the story of her benevolence by assuming that she put something away for the dog when she ate her own meals. Talk about hyper-analysis, but I mean, this is how parody is a great way to illustrate the hyper-stupidity of the documentary hypothesis. Then they go on, now in direct conflict with this, the other tradition had it that she kept the dog poor, for he's called her poor dog. And in keeping with this fact, instead of giving him meat, she gave him nothing but bones. Indeed, so extreme was her stinginess toward the poor dog that according to this tradition, she actually put away the bones in the cupboard with which to mock the poor dog's hunger. This is how people approach the Bible. And by the way, there's still going on a series anti-religious, read anti-Christian Bible study by a witch and a Pharisee. This is their kind of approach. This is what you'll get from them. Nonsense. Anyway, a woman could scarcely be represented more inconsistently than Mrs. Hubbard was by these 2 traditions, and consequently none but those who are fettered by tradition can fail to see that the 2 must have originated from 2 different authors. This is the path they take, and they think they're serious. For the sake of distinction, we shall style one of the authors Goose A and the other Goose B. In these 2 forms, then, the traditions concerning this ancient owner of a dog came down from prehistoric times. At length, there arose a literary age in England, and then R, redactor, put together into one account written by the 2 Gooses, but failed to conceal their incongruities, so that to this day Mother Hubbard is placed in the ridiculous light of going to the cupboard when there was nothing in it, of going there notwithstanding her kindness to her dog to tantalize him by getting him a mere bone, and to cap the climax of going all the way to the cupboard to get the bone when she knew very well that not a bone was there. This is how twisted it gets. But again, great satire to bring that out. Some people are unscientific enough to think that in thus analyzing the poem, we are seeking to destroy its value. But everyone who has the critical faculty developed can see that this ancient household lyric is much more precious to our souls since we have come to understand its structure, and that contradictory as its 2 source documents were, is a blessed thing that in the providence of God both have been preserved in such a form that critical analysis is capable of separating and restoring them. That is JEPD, or documentary hypothesis. And it's preposterous. I did give you this link, didn't I? I'll post it again just in case. And good to see once again more people in chat. Conclusion. There have been many efforts across the centuries to destroy the integrity of the biblical records. Some attacks come from militant skeptics who make no apology for their in-your-face assaults. Other efforts are more subtle. They issue from those who profess a friendship with the scriptures, like the witch and the Pharisee, the Hebrew roots people, etc., New Agers, syncretists, and all those, but who in reality are enemies as deadly as the rabid atheist. The conscientious Christian need not be distracted by their fanciful dreaming. So if you ever hear anybody proposing these ridiculous ideas, just give them this. I know they won't read it, but give them the link anyway. Okay? So, on the matter of more subtle attacks, also in recent weeks, a Muslim tried to say that I was lying about Jesus being God partly. I can't even read my own notes. Let me try again. Muslim tried to say I was lying about Jesus being God partly on the basis of Isaiah 9, 6, and 7. So let's go see what those are in Hebrew on the left, Greek on the right. I had the right page, but I don't know what happened here. Sometimes when I increase the size of one page, it increases another, and I don't want it to. Okay, there's verse 4, 5. Okay. So, for a child is, you got to read left to right for the Hebrew. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Okay? And then in Greek, we read left to right, for a child was born to us, a son was given to us, in whom the sovereignty became upon his shoulder, and is called his name of Great Counsel, the messenger of Great Counsel, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Potentate, Ruler of Peace, Father of the Ages, or Eternal Father, Everlasting Father. Okay? So obviously the Son in both cases is being called Mighty God, Everlasting Father. All right? So the Muslim was trying to say that I was twisting it, but I'll show you the document that he gave me from some other translation. Look at how this is twisted. And he said I was the one twisting. For a child has been born to us, a son given to us, and the authority upon his shoulder, and the wondrous advisor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, called his name the Prince of Peace. You see how that's twisted? So it makes God the Father calling the Son's name the Prince of Peace. And I think that's the right way it should be read. And this was on a site called Chabad.org. Let me just give you the link. You can go check that out if you want. I looked up this translator named Barry A. Rubin. How does he justify the rendering here? We have the Septuagint and the other ancient witnesses, even the Masoretic, to tell us that this translation is disingenuous and biased against Christianity. I mean, it's obvious. On top of the bias of the Masoretic text itself, which is against Jesus as Messiah. And I looked up a critical review on Amazon that stated that it even this translation confused Rachel and her mother Rebecca as to which one married Jacob. So it is so carelessly done that it mixed up Rebecca and Rachel as to which one was the mother and which one was the daughter that married Jacob. So for a Muslim to dredge up this, lone twisting and charge a Christian with manipulating the text is a dozen different kinds of arrogance and ignorance. Because, obviously you can't get this translation from that text. This is somebody trying to twist it so that Jesus isn't called the Everlasting Father or the Mighty God. But the thing is, who goes to the trouble to look up these claims and examine them? Most conversation online is of the soundbite variety, where there's a dozen people firing snippets at each other, happens all the time, and nobody can be bothered to click on links to resources or read more than a paragraph. But this is what influenced the average person to believe all these lies about the Bible. And I'm not seeing many Christians countering them at all. This is why I try to provide just information. My lone Discord channel is a library because I just want it there so people can look things up. And I don't have everything in it, but I have enough that people could use as a resource. But the thing is that there aren't enough Christians taking advantage of the internet to find this stuff. And granted, it takes a lot of time and work, and a lot of people don't have the time. But that's why I do what I do. But the thing is that we have to be aware that this stuff exists and use it when the time comes. And most Christians, it seems, want to cloister into monasteries, basically, and stay away from the world. Which is fine when you need to recharge and be with other Christians and learn and all that, but there comes a point when, as Jesus said, we need more workers for the harvest, and there's not very many out there. So the world has gone completely mad on all sorts of levels, just as prophesied. God flooded the earth long ago because everyone was evil and violent, but this time the final judgments will come in a world devoid not only of morality, but reason itself, as we've seen in these Krazy Klaims. If anyone listening out there is still in possession of their faculties and a sense of right and wrong, but you haven't accepted Jesus as Savior, I would urge you to do so immediately, because I wouldn't want to see you suffer what's coming, because what we see now is only the wrath of people and Satan, but the wrath of God will be far worse and well-deserved, because I even off this topic into just the political realm, the social realm, the wheels have flown off every ounce, every bolt of what used to be called civilization. I mean, people are saying, it's just like what I think I mentioned last week, or did I not? I think I did, about where somebody said that because a tranny won a beauty contest, that it proves men are better than women. And we see every day in the news, there's some like they're trying to outdo themselves in outrageous stupidity, and saying, like, it's like there's a meme I should have had handy, where there's a picture of a brown bear, a black bear, and a white bear. The brown bear, is listed properly. The black bear is listed properly, and the white bear is listed racist bear. I mean, it's meant as a joke, but just like this parody we read, it is a great illustration of how crazy the world is. It's just completely unhinged. It has no attachment at all to anything rational or consistent. It's all very hypocritical and arrogant and, I don't know, just crazy. So this is being applied to the Bible by twisty things like this that we're seeing on the screen. And it all started with me talking to some little teenager who thought he knew everything, that said that this is, that God really does hate sinners, and hates most people, in fact, and only pretends to love anybody. I mean, what can I expect from the world today? But this is what we're dealing with, and we have to know that people are actually doing these things. So let me look at the chat a little bit. We might get done a little early today. How about that? Let me just go ahead and get a sip and then read some names. So we got Dom and Soundleys and Good Servant and Karen Ann Preston, P. Atchin, Salted Cedar, Rachel Menifee, Chow, Emlu, and I think that's everybody. No, Cat Supercomputer. I missed that before. On this topic, no more news. Adam Green on BitChute goes deep for a few months now. Okay, so everybody, if you can go to BitChute and watch no more news. KNOW. Let's see. Okay, that's just scripture quote. Oh, Adam Green is an anti-Semite. Okay. Well, maybe not. All right. Let's see who else we got. Kent Hovind videos are fun for that topic. Okay. Someone named Martin is here. Dank is here. Why don't you have a wrench? I don't know. We'll fix that problem. Great to see you too. And Coffee Beans. And Chow has a link to my ebooks. Thank you for that. I'm interested in looking what you have about the documentary hypothesis. Okay. Yeah, just if you just got here, I don't know if you did or not, but that one article on the documentary hypothesis is pretty good summary of things and has that great parody of it. So, anything else? Because that's all the material I had. I know I read fast. Just what I do. But the point is that documentary hypothesis has been debunked long ago, but people still try to use it, and too many Christians don't know any better. And all those other claims at that one destructive criticism page was a good one. And no, we're not lying and twisting the Bible according to Muslim critics who have nothing to say. Which always, it's like, atheists and Muslims and pagans and witches and New Agers all have this obsession with the Bible and attacking the Bible, and they'll cooperate with each other to do it. But they don't do this to other books. So, something about catching flack when you're over the target comes to mind. So anyway, that's all I have for today. Again, I don't know what I'm going to talk about next week. Now, later in August, end of August, beginning of September, I might not do a live stream. I'll be busy. But as far as I know, there's nothing coming up before then that I'll have to be away for. But I'd let you know if I suddenly knew I wasn't going to be around for the weekend. I should probably try to do a short video and let you guys know. So there you are. Yeah, the Jesus didn't exist claim, we've gone over that before, but Bart Ehrman, the famous atheist scholar, even blast other atheists for saying Jesus didn't exist. And even Wikipedia, which is decidedly not pro-Christian, admits that Jesus existed. They all point to two things: his baptism by John the Baptist and his order of execution by Pontius Pilate are facts of history outside of the Bible and can't be denied. So Jesus existed, absolutely. And we have at least fragments from the early second century for the New Testament. So nobody can say that the Catholic Church made it up. We've spent so many videos going over those kinds of things. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming. My teeth are feeling much better. I'm on my third round of antibiotics. Someday I'll be done taking pills, but the thing is that there's still a lot of work to be done. So, fun times. Anyway, thanks for coming, everybody, and if we're still here, we'll see you next week.